Big week for the San Francisco 49ers, returning from their Week 9 bye, getting ready for the Jaguars in Week 10. Deebo Samuel back at practice, Trent Williams not, and we've got an insider scouting report on why the Commanders were willing to trade Chase Young to the 49ers for a third-round pick. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Big ups to all the everydayers out there. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, can't wait to get to the conversation I had with David Harrison. He's the host of Locked On Commanders, giving me some really good insight on the player the 49ers are getting in Chase Young, why he was even available to the 49ers, and maybe the expectations for what Chase Young could be for the 49ers the rest of the year. But first, Croc, some news with 49ers getting back to practice after the bye week. And the best of the news is that not only is Chase Young on the field practicing for the 49ers, wearing number 92, Deebo Samuel, number 19, is back on the practice field as well. So that's fantastic. No Trent Williams, but getting Deebo back is super important for the offense. And we'll see what 92 now Chase Young can do for the San Francisco 49ers defense.
I think yesterday you mentioned how last season when they didn't have Deebo, they still were putting up 30 points. This year it felt like they've just needed him more. So I'm really looking forward to getting Deebo Samuel back and just start to see this offense look more like what it looked like throughout the first 5 weeks.
Yeah, reset and two very potentially impactful pieces for the 49ers in Week 10 that weren't there for him in the previous 3 games that they lost. So that's super important. And Chase Young wearing number 92, looking the part, looks like a first-round pick, right? Just from those videos.
It looks massive and lean, quick, powerful, strong, like all the things that you want to see out of a guy that's going to play opposite Nick Bosa. I think the big question is, and I heard you ask this when you were on with David, just is, could the 49ers potentially re-sign him or at least put him in position to try to bring him back? But just watching those practice clips, obviously the 49ers traded for him last week at the deadline. We were excited then. But I say even more excited when you just see him in that red and gold. You see him on that practice field. You see him warming up next to Nick Bosa. I'm like, okay, let's go. I can't be more excited for this game against Jacksonville.
All right. With that said, and yeah, I came away with my conversation with David Harrison of Locked On Commanders being more excited than I already was to see what Chase Young looks like with the San Francisco 49ers. So let's get to that conversation next. Excited to be joined by David Harrison of Locked On Commanders today. We're getting a little impromptu crossover segment here on Locked On 49ers, Locked On Commanders. Brian Peacock of Locked On 49ers with David Harrison of Locked On Commanders. And we didn't get to do this last week, but with the 49ers bye, it's still very timely. And just found out Chase Young's going to be wearing jersey number 92. So appreciate you jumping on with me today, David Harrison, to talk about Chase Young and what he meant to the Commanders, how he ended up a San Francisco 49er. Just big picture, really quick, David, from the Commanders' perspective. Obviously, new ownership, a lot could potentially be changing. I was kind of shocked seeing Sweat and Young get traded. Was it the same for you folks around the Commanders? Because it sounds like something that could be a long-term rebuild happening in Washington.
Yeah, I think most people around here, we expected one of the guys to probably be traded, as the conversations and the rumors, continue to build. I mean, talking to the 2 guys in the locker rooms, leading up to the Philadelphia game, and then especially after the Philadelphia game. I mean, Chase, I think Chase was a little bit more kind of in control of his emotions. He's been through some things here in DC, so he's kind of used to having to answer tough questions and a little bit of dramatics behind what we're talking to him about. But Montez, you can see that he was emotional. You know what I mean? Following the loss of the Eagles, he was the last player off the field, and that's never something that you see in Montez. And then just talking to him after the game, he was still answering the questions as a what if. But there was more of a when it happens tone to things. I think most people expected Montez Sweat to be the one traded, to be quite honest with you, because he was going to fetch more in compensation. So you would still have one defensive end in Chase Young, who, obviously has the really high ceiling and the athletic, tools to be a great pass rusher in the league. But then you would also get the better draft compensation by moving Montez Sweat, and essentially the decision that everyone was dreading in the offseason of which one do you sign, which one do you not sign, because the assumption is that you're not going to be able to pay both of those guys, around or north of $20 million that they're going to want, would basically be made for you. And either Chase Young would get re-signed, franchise tagged, or, worst case scenario, he would not pan out and they would let him walk and wait for a compensatory pick in 2025. But the team decided to move both of them, and there's some reasons that you might think that they did move both of them, and some reasons why people might disagree with moving both of them. But at the end of the day, both men are moving on. And yeah, the Washington Commanders are shifting the way that they're building their roster. I don't think it's a full rebuild. I think I would call it more of a refocusing. I would think of how they're going to dedicate their resources moving forward.
Okay, went with a different I thought you were going to say retooled, refocusing. I like that.
Yeah.
That's you should be on the PR team for Washington. Yeah. The fans are like, what the hell are you guys doing right now, trading these players? So, and Montez Sweat, as recent as since then, re-signed with the Chicago Bears, and nice contract for Montez Sweat. And Montez Sweat's a good player. The ceiling might not be as high as someone like Chase Young, as you mentioned, and he's been a good pass rusher, really good against the run, sort of a complete player. My question would be, how is Montez Sweat so much more valuable to the Commanders or other teams, obviously around the league, to have a high second round pick valuation or a very late comp pick, third round valuation in trade for a guy who not that long ago was the number 2 pick in the NFL draft? So how is that value so different between those two players, and what went wrong with Chase Young that he's not worth more than a late third round pick for another team in the 4th year of his rookie contract?
Yeah, I think number one, consistency is going to be the reason behind that. Obviously health is a concern. Chase, when he injured his knee in 2021, it ended up taking him more than a year to come back, and lost in the mix of that. A lot of those conversations is the fact that he actually had 2 knee surgeries. When they repaired the injured knee, they heard against the Buccaneers, there was also damage in the other knee that they went ahead and they did some grafting and they did some repairing and did a whole bunch of stuff. So he wasn't just rehabbing 1 knee surgery, he was rehabbing 2. And I mean, when you think about it, when you're rehabbing 2 knee surgeries, there's a longer period of time where you're doing nothing because you don't have a strong leg to lean on to start rehabbing the injured leg. You now have 2 injured legs. There's no third leg to use to be able to rehab those 2 injuries. So I think that contributed to it. There were obviously reports of setbacks and stuff while he was training with Von Miller that nobody here was ever able to corroborate. So it still lives in the land of rumor. But at the end of the day, he came back for a little bit at the end of 2022, but really coming into the season, Chase looked physically, he looked better than I've ever seen him in the National Football League. And that was really exciting. And he seemed like his spirits were up, but regardless of that ceiling and all that stuff, Montez Sweat, he's had a few, dings and dents here and there. He missed some time with COVID. He had a family loss, unfortunately, that cost him some time a couple years ago. But for the most part, he's been the much more available player. And Brian, as well as anybody, that you have the greatest talent in the world on your roster, but if they're not on the field, it doesn't really do you a whole lot of good. So I think that's honestly, I think that's reason number one why they were able to get more for Montez, because when you look at him, you're the Chicago Bears, you kind of know what you're getting. Now, at the same time, you also know what you're getting. Like you said, I think Tez is kind of more so than not. I think he's kind of reached his ceiling. I think we kind of just know who Montez Sweat is going to be, and that's not bad. But with Chase Young, you still see the potential for growth there. And if San Francisco can tap into what remaining growth he has this season, I don't know what their plans are long term. That's something I'm interested to hear from you. But if even just for this season, if they can tap into more of that potential than Washington was able to, then they've got themselves a pretty good pass rusher.
Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. It's a very special time of the year right now in the sporting world because the NBA is going, the NHL is going, and PrizePicks has something very special for everybody out there that wants to have the most fun you've had and win 25 times your money potentially at PrizePicks this football season, because basketball season is here And now you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, Steph Curry plus George Kittle, a combo of 10.5 of 3 points made plus receptions. You can have a ton of fun there. You can play along with some famous celebrities as well that are playing on the PrizePicks platform, like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz. So all you got to do is you go to PrizePicks, you pick 2 or more players and pick their more or less on their projected stats at PrizePicks and potentially turn, say, $10 into $250. And for our listeners, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL or download the app and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. You said something there which was interesting because you're talking about his injuries, and I didn't even know about the second knee injury. So that's fascinating and could obviously and is the big reason why it took him a little bit longer to come back. But you said physically he looked at the best he'd been in the National Football League. So do you think he's back physically? Because that was something I was worried about. I was like, okay, former number 2 overall pick, but if the injury was so devastating that he's not that guy anymore, then that should probably alter some of the expectations the 49ers and 49ers fans have about what Chase Young could be the rest of the season.
Yeah, physically, I think he's great. I think he's fine physically, and I was really excited for him. I'm still excited for him. I don't say I was like I'm not anymore. Like I'm still excited for him to be in the physical condition that he is, and I think that's really important for him. I think the reason though that you end up seeing him, moved on from Washington, like I said, one it's the reallocation of money and draft picks. You know what I mean? They have 4 first-round picks on the defensive line alone, 6 first-round picks in their defense, and I'll be honest, their defense is not playing like a defense with 6 first-round picks. And so now you face the prospect of dumping, I would say dumping, but investing, $30 to $40 million more dollars in trying to keep these 2 in the offseason. And granted, you got north of $80 million in cap space to work with, but do you want to spend half of that on 2 guys on the defensive line? That's one of the worst defenses in the NFL. That doesn't make a lot of business sense. And Josh Harris, the new owner of the Commanders, he's a businessman first and foremost. So I think that's really the biggest push to get this done. And then also you get that 3rd round. It's a compensatory pick, right, from the 49ers. So you get a 3rd round pick back, but you don't get a 2025 3rd round compensatory pick. You get a 2024 compensatory pick. And let's be honest, that compensatory pick they're getting is ahead of any compensatory pick they would have even gotten in 2025, numerically. So that's that. I think that's the biggest reason. And then of course there's the reports, and I hate this part of our journalistic community, but when guys leave, there tend to be reports here and there that come out that for whatever reason didn't come out beforehand of maybe Chase wasn't, clicking with the coaching staff, maybe wasn't clicking within Jack Del Rio's defensive scheme, doing a little bit of freelancing. And I'm not going to say that none of that is true, but I don't think that's the biggest reason that this move was made. And I think that, Chase Young having the opportunity to go to another team that's a contender. I mean, playing for contenders always kind of makes guys toe the line a little bit easier, when that's why so many people go to Bill Belichick and then have a lesser attitude issue than maybe they had elsewhere, because I might get a Lombardi. But also playing with this guy, Nick Bosa, Nick is a leader on that team, and he knows Chase. He knows how to talk to Chase. He knows how to work with Chase. So if Chase, for whatever reason, does try to go outside the script, Nick is going to know how to say, hey, buddy, like, you need to follow the rules of my house, because this is where you are now.
Yeah, expectations are different with the 49ers. And, it was already a really good defensive line, so it's not like he's going to get less attention with the 49ers defensive line because there was already so talented where he was. But Nick Bosa stayed back in Santa Clara with Chase Young to try to get him ready after the bye to jump in. And I'm sure he could play a full complement of snaps if the coaching staff wants him to in week 10 after that bye, after being traded to the San Francisco 49ers. It's really interesting what you said there, because the reports from Mike Silver of the Chronicle locally, and he said they came from Washington Commanders coaches. So I don't know if it's sour grapes. It's hard to lean too much into that with anonymous quotes, but it said it came from Washington's coaching staff. And when you look at, high picks that are busts, and I'm sure there's some people that called Chase Young certain things about whether he was a bust or disappointing or whatever. It's generally, you should be worth more than a late 3rd round pick if you're a defensive end drafted number 2 overall, during your rookie contract. So, somewhat disappointing how his career went. And if you look at historically busts in the NFL, it's, injuries or motivation, so it was like, okay, maybe that's the part of it then, effort and motivation, just from an effort standpoint, like just watching the film, watching him play. Has that been something you noticed where it's like, oh, he's not really even trying to, hold up against the run. He doesn't have that dog in him, right? Is that something you noticed?
Yeah, the criticism, talking about the Mike Silver report, the criticism of Chase Young, for in those specific aspects, like it's not really new. It's just being presented in a new way because of all the trades that have happened and everything.
Mhm.
But I mean, if you go back to 2021, I want to say, I think it was like early 2021, maybe even late 2020, Jack Del Rio was making comments publicly about certain members of the defense playing off script, freelancing, trying to be the hero instead of just doing their job. And, he never said, I'm talking about Chase Young, but a lot of connections were made to Chase Young. And that's where you hope that he takes that next step with the San Francisco 49ers. And I truly believe he's going to take that next step with the 49ers. And then whether or not he stays there in 2024 or moves on, I think that's going to help him moving forward in his career. Because when you turn on the tape, there are times, I've always kind of said Chase Young picks and chooses when he wants to be full Chase and when he wants to be half Chase, and there are situations where you turn on the all 22 and you see him, if he gets stopped on his first move, he doesn't really go to a second move, doesn't keep the legs churning. He kind of stops. And if you just see it once or twice, you kind of look at it like, oh, well, he's just turning himself into like a spy. So he could knock the pass down or maybe chase the quarterback. And, sure. But the amount of times that you see it on tape, that's not what it is. And that's not the scheme. And, when you see guys like James Smith-Williams, Casey Toohill come in, they're not executing the same thing. Montez Sweat on the opposite side isn't doing the same thing. So when you have one defensive end out of a group of 5, 6, 7 on tape that is doing the anomaly, typically means that guy is the anomaly, not the scheme being the anomaly. But again, that bust label, I mean, it's going to be there. He didn't make it to the end of his rookie year. So that's something that he's going to have to own. And what I hope is that both sides, the organization realizes there are some systemic failures in their part, because this isn't a player that Ron Rivera's regime inherited. This was their first round pick. You know what I mean? So I hope the organization acknowledges the mistakes that they made in this process, but I also hope Chase comes out of it and accepts and owns his part of why this didn't work out in Washington as well, because that's the way he's going to become a better player in San Francisco, because we all expect him to ball out in San Francisco, and for the conversation to then turn into, oh man, look how terrible the Commanders coaches are, because this is the real Chase Young that we're now seeing. But I think a combination of having that embarrassment to carry of being traded before the end of your first rookie deal or your rookie deal, the injury, the chip on your shoulder of being counted out, and then of course being on a contender. I think those three things alone should be a catalyst for us to see a better version of Chase Young. And while Commanders fans are going to be frustrated for just because of the guy, I'm super excited to see if that's true.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm even more excited to watch number 92 play for the 49ers now after talking with you, David, than before, because, if he's still that prospect and that's still in there, and motivation is huge. And at the same time, like, how many times have you ever heard about a guy who could go crazy for 4 months and earn 50, 100 extra $1 million, compared to what he might get, it's pretty amazing the situation he's in. And I don't know if he's in the long-term plans for the 49ers, probably remains to be seen, but you mentioned the compensation. I think it just made sense for the 49ers too, to say, okay, look, if we have extra picks, we have extra comp picks, we can send a comp pick and maybe he walks and, that 2025 comp pick you talked about, we get one later anyway. I mean, that's well worth it for a team that's trying to compete right now. So I guess that's how they landed on the compensation. And I would have thought Chase Young would have gotten more. And I'm also still shocked that Washington traded both of those guys. And I thought, man, this must be buyer beware if they're willing to move on from Chase Young and don't want to see this out and maybe sign him again. But talking to you, knowing that the athleticism and explosion is still there, I mean, that's exciting. That's got to be super exciting for 49ers fans, man. So I can't wait till I see Chase Young on the field, see what he can be for the San Francisco 49ers. And David, always a pleasure chatting with you. Appreciate you jumping on and giving some insight to our listeners about the newest San Francisco 49er and Chase Young.
Yes, sir.
Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. So, for example, 49ers 6-1 odds to win the Super Bowl might be the best odds you get for the 49ers after a 3-game losing streak before they're about to go on a big winning streak here with some big games up on the schedule. 49ers to win the Super Bowl, How about you can bet on any one of the 49ers games throughout the season, spreads, player props, over-unders, not just NFL football either, college football, NBA basketball, NHL, motorsports, combat sports, snooker, you name it, you can find it at FanDuel. Again, that's $150 if your team wins that money line bet to new customers at FanDuel. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon or download the app. Get this football season in gear in the second half of the year. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right. So after listening to David Harrison, Croc, talk about Chase Young and what he could be for the San Francisco 49ers, the best thing I heard is that physically he looks like the number 2 overall pick still. And look, we saw a couple of shots of him and videos of him doing, working with bags at practice. But this is a dude physically. So if, and maybe he needs Nick Bosa to be his mentor and his big brother, because one of the things that David talked about, and, we talked a little bit more about it off the air, about Chase Young. And something I didn't even realize about Chase Young is that he's from the Washington area. So I think it might be really good from the expectations that you have as a number 2 overall pick. You're the savior of the franchise. Then you have that ACL injury, which was, much worse. And it was 2 knees instead of 1 knee that I didn't realize either. And then you're at home and you've got to be that star guy that you always were in your hometown. And, and you still have all your boys and everyone's around. I think it might be good for him to go away again and become the player he was at Ohio State with one of his ex-Ohio State teammates and someone that can be his big brother, someone that there's no better mentor as far as, okay, you want to have a work ethic, you want to know what it's like to work like a pro, and someone who knows this scheme already and has played at the highest level and become a defensive player of the year with Nick Bosa. I think that's a fantastic fit. So I'm super excited to know that physically he looks like that number 2 overall pick still.
I think that's a great point that you brought up about him, where he's from and kind of, living up to either the hype or just the responsibilities that you have that are put on you when you are playing close to home. And I've had the opportunity to be close to home and also play away. There's a big difference in your focus when you are away, right? When I was playing in other states, whether it was in college and I was in Arkansas, whether it was my rookie in Arena League in San Antonio, whether it was I was in Portland or even on the East Coast in New Jersey with the New York Jets, I always was able to focus on football and everything that I had to do to be ready. When I played at home with the San Jose SaberCats in the Arena Football League, people were visiting during the week, because, San Jose was an hour drive from Stockton, right? So I'd have people come and visit me during the week. Maybe they'd have me up later than I would be if they weren't there. Tickets. I mean, I would have 50 family members at my games. And I would have to try to figure out, like, okay, how do I get the tickets, get the person on the phone? I would talk to them. They'd set it up. All right, your family can sit in this section. But I was responsible for more things. And all those things took away from my focus. Now, we did have a great year. We won the Arena Bowl championship. But I do just remember dealing with a lot more as opposed to when I was away and somewhere else. So I think him being in Santa Clara, being in San Jose, in that area, and being able to just focus on being the best player he is without the outside distractions and being able to go under the wing of Nick Bosa. Hopefully he's living with Nick Bosa right now, because you come middle of the year, you don't want to get a place, you don't want to get a house, you don't want to get an apartment, like put your name on a lease. Like, hey, can I just stay with you, Nick Bosa, rent out this room until it's time for me to go? I think that would really help him in that transition. And it was great to hear that Nick Bosa stayed behind to help him get up to speed with what the 49ers are doing during the bye week. So that was awesome to hear as well.
It's really difficult because when you start putting things together and you hear about, and clearly there was something there with the team and the coaching staff, and someone as talented as Chase Young shouldn't be available for a late 3rd round pick, right? And for the team to want a comp level 3rd round pick for a player, rather than the opportunity to see out the rest of his rookie contract that they drafted number 2 overall and potentially re-sign him long-term after they already traded the other starting defensive end on the roster that was a former 1st round pick, for nobody else in the NFL to have offered more than a late 3rd round pick for Chase Young, there's a reason for that. And I don't know if it's motivation. I don't know what it has been for him to not And clearly there's been, I start watching some more tape of him. And you heard, by the way, Mike Silver was with Mike Silver, longtime Bay Area ties. Jack Del Rio, longtime Bay Area ties. Last season, or not last season, was it last season? Sometime between when Mike Silver was with the San Francisco Chronicle and after he was at NFL Network, he was in Washington. There's a non-0% chance that Mike Silver's direct, source is Jack Del Rio, defensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders. And, and for some reason, it just didn't work. Much like with Trey Lance, for Trey Lance to be drafted number 3 overall and be traded for a 4th round pick, and nobody's trying to offer more than that. And the fact that as talented as Chase Young is, and he's shown more on tape that in the NFL than Trey Lance did, he's only available for a late 3rd round pick, and nobody else was knocking down their door to give him an earlier 3rd or a 2nd round pick like Montez Sweat got. Like Montez Sweat might be the 33rd pick in the draft that they gave up. And we're talking about the 100th pick in the draft. 70 picks difference in trade value between those two guys, So something's there, something that a lot of people in the league didn't like, and the Niners wanted to bring in Chase Young more than anybody. That's fascinating.
I think part of it could be the contract. Now, again, I know for Sweat, and maybe there was just a little bit more consistency because it was a contract thing for him as well. But I think for Chase Young, I think that probably had a big hand in it. Like, how many teams are going to – one, you have to have some of the cap space needed to bring them in right now, whatever those ramifications are.
Yeah.
And then also you have to really kind of be trending upward. Typically, you would see that. I think the Sweat trade to Chicago was a head scratcher for a lot of people. People are like, what the heck are they doing?
Yeah.
I understand you're getting a terrific player. This is the same team that traded, was it Chase Claypool? They gave up a 2nd for Chase Claypool.
Yeah, and the Dolphins got their 1st round pick taken away. So Chase Claypool ended up being 32. That's the last pick in the 1st round. That's what they ended up giving up for Chase Claypool. And he didn't give him anything. And that they did the exact same trade for Montez Sweat, but they re-upped him. And I think you nailed it, Croc. It's the contract. So Montez Sweat has shown enough and shown the consistency that another team like the Bears was willing to say, I want to trade for him because I know I already want to sign him. I'm not willing to say that about Chase Young. So the only thing that a team was willing to give up, in this case, the 49ers, was, well, we're going to get that back a year later in a comp pick probably if we don't want to re-sign him. And nobody was willing to say, I like Chase Young right now. From what I've seen of him in the NFL, I like him more than that. Right. So I think that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Being able to grab him, though, and still have your 1st round pick and 2nd round pick, something that helped your team get better right now. To what extent, we'll find out, right? Does it help the back end? I hope so. But just to be able to get a guy to see, right, that has that much talent and see if he can turn it around and maybe you can figure out something long-term, I think that would be great for the 49ers organization. Like if he just finished, and again, you'd have to pay him, but let's say 12 sacks. That's not like, you're not going to have to pay somebody Nick Bosa money, but it'd be a good contract, right? You're still better long-term for that. And you have your bookends for the next however many years, 4 or 5 years, like you have your legit bookends.
That's where it gets tough because then, do you franchise tag him if he plays that good? Do you immediately start changing your other plans with other guys? Because if Chase Young is playing like that, do you start changing plans that you had for? And I know Eric Armstead's contract's convoluted because he restructured, and so Charvarius Ward is in a place with his contract. I don't think the 49ers would get out of it, but you start looking at your big contracts on the team and you start making different plans. Does it change your plans for Ayuk if Chase Young all of a sudden does something crazy in the last half of this season for you, right? Because, in a lot of ways, you start looking at what's important for a football team. If that dude that Chase Young could be at defensive end, that starts to take precedence over some other positions and some other players potentially for you. So that is an opportunity. Although with what was given up, I think the plan clearly from John Lynch and everybody in the front office was, look, we will probably get a comp pick back. So this is a rental until further notice.
Yeah. He gets those 12 double-digit sacks. Bye-bye, Ayuk. And I love Ayuk, but that is something that, like, I could see that happening, right? Like, I think it's easier. And, again, Ayuk is terrific. I think he's the best, like, just pure receiver on the 49ers. I still think it's a little easier to find that than a double-digit sack guy to go along with Nick Bosa. So if I have to choose between the two, I would use a first-round pick on a receiver even though Kyle doesn't really care for rookie receivers, as we see, but I'd use a first round pick on a receiver as opposed to thinking I can find a Chase Young at the end of the first round.
Which is what the Bears just said. They're like, look, there's a better chance that Montez Sweat's better than what we were going to get at the end with that pick in the high second round anyway.
Yeah.
So, and they're willing to not only give up the pick, but also pay him for the right to do so. So that's pretty telling for what the Bears think. Although they thought the exact same thing about wide receiver last year, and that was not smart.
Hey, now Chase Young doesn't work, then all right, he walks and, like you said, potentially get a comp pick, and 49ers just do it moving, and you keep Brandon Ayuk.
Give it a shot. You're trying to win a Super Bowl, right? That's important. Yeah. So specifically with Montez Sweat, and you heard David talk a lot about scouting report, what kind of player he is, and just watching him play, and whether it's trying to play hero ball, trying to live up to all the expectations of the local kid gone good, and the number 2 overall pick in the draft, and trying to go be a star and maybe play off script too much, whatever it is within the scheme. I think with mentorship potentially from Bosa, change of scenery, maybe a little chip on your shoulder. By the way, Washington Commanders, week 17 at their place. You think Chase Young's going to get up for that game? I think so. That'll be a fun one. And then when you consider how he's winning, I think technique-wise, things that he could learn from Nick Bosa will be hugely important, because we see time and time again in the NFL, most of Chase Young's sacks are just clean wins, right? That's not how most sacks are gained in the NFL. Like, that's important if you can do that, and he's shown that he can do that. And if he's still that physically explosive guy, that's awesome. You start adding like a little extra, technique with your hands. Maybe just keep rushing, little extra motor to say, look, we're gonna do this as a team. And so I'm gonna push him toward you. You're gonna push him toward me. Now everybody's sacks are going up. So that's what excites me about Chase Young, is that it's still in there. And even though we haven't seen it yet, like, that talent is there. And it's not going to be, I don't think it's that far-fetched to look at how he's done in the NFL and think, man, this could be just insane, because that ceiling has not been touched yet. And if he comes close to that with this 49ers defensive line with Bosa on the other side, look out. I mean, that'll be special. That'd be so fun to watch. I can't wait.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see what Chase Young ends up looking like for the San Francisco 49ers. Appreciate David Harrison joining us and giving us that insight. Of course, Croc and I will be back. We got a Winky Wednesday tomorrow, turning the page to week 10, start looking a lot at those Jacksonville Jaguars as well. Appreciate everybody making us your first listen. Subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Croc and I back tomorrow right here, Locked On 49ers.